Hello, and welcome back to AP Environmental Science. So my first question for you today is, do you know what this is? You should at least think that it looks familiar living here in Texas. This is a salt cedar, yeah, and you'll find them all over the place. How about this? Anyone who has an aquarium or has taken biology should recognize Elodia, or Elodia, you can say it however way you want. And then this guy right here, attractive fellow, this is known as the Asian carp. And one you're familiar with here would be the nutria. It looks really cute in this picture, but I think some of you, especially those of you on the crew team, might think that it isn't. But anyway, these four organisms, right, these two plants and these two animals, have something in common. Even though they are all different, they are all on the wanted list. All four of these species are invasive, right? They are non-native, but not only are they non-native, they are actually invasive. Non-native simply means that it doesn't come from the area, it's not original to the area, right? Invasive means that it actually causes damage to the ecosystem, and there are lots of invasive species out there, some of whom you probably don't even know are invasive. So, to that end, I have put in your PowerPoint 2 links to invasive species lists, and you should probably check them out, because you certainly wouldn't want to bring an invasive species into your area. So for your first question, what is the factor that's most responsible for threatened and endangered species? Well, as you read these, loss of habitat ought to be floating right up to the top of the list, because that is actually the factor that is going to be the greatest threat to biodiversity. Having said that, we know that over-harvesting, over-collection, over-hunting, and overfishing are going to be number 2. And invasive species actually are number 3 on the list of threats to biodiversity. They come in and compete with species that are already in niches in the ecosystem, and they can cause huge amounts of damage. And the first one that we want to talk about is something that I think you're probably pretty familiar with, and that would be the fire ant, because everybody really enjoys fire ants. That was sarcasm. Fire ants actually came from South America. They have moved all over the place now, right? And so you have fire ants pretty much lots and lots of places. But they are not native to anywhere in Texas. They are not native to anywhere in the United States, right? They cause massive damage to agricultural crops because they will actually eat crops. They displace native ants that are helpful, that aerate the soil, that are great prey sources. They actually also eat other organisms, and so they do eliminate food sources for some of the wildlife in the ecosystem. So not only do they damage our crops, but they also eat other plants, and they kill other animals, right? And they've actually been known to kill livestock, any ground-dwelling wildlife, especially babies, and they're a huge nuisance to humans. And can be lethal, actually. If you have enough, if you're a small child or you're elderly or whatever, and you have enough ant stings, that toxin can actually kill you, okay? Now, the next one you're probably also familiar with, and that would be the feral hog. These were released for food, and over the last 10 years, their population has literally, like, exploded all over the place. And you can see here, this looks like a bomb went off, right? And so this is the result of feral hog damage, okay? But not just do they root and they outcompete and they breed like crazy. I mean, they have lots of little piglets, right? They destroy all kinds of stuff. They also are vectors for diseases, okay? They're reservoirs for diseases that can be transferred to humans and to livestock, okay? And so they are a huge problem. They're also amazingly difficult to control. They're highly aggressive. They're hard to keep in limits, right? And ultimately they don't belong here at all. Okay, starlings are one that you might not know. You see these little guys with the black and white spots all over the place. They are actually not from here. They are from Europe, right? They're European starlings, and they were brought to the United States in 1890s, which does beg the question, are they actually part of the ecosystem now? But here's the catch about them. They destroy crops too, because they like to eat them. They really compete with native birds like sparrows. Sparrows are also European sparrow. Sparrows are also invasive, and they compete with native birds for nesting space. And so starlings and sparrows actually go in the same list. Starlings, however, flock in huge numbers, like 100,000. This is a flock of starlings flying over this neighborhood. So they can also do this at airports, which causes damage. In this picture, they're actually stealing from this little squirrel guy. Yeah. Okay. Boa constrictors. Boa constrictors are tricky because they are huge, right? But they now have breeding populations in Florida because the climate and the habitat in Florida and the southern United States is pretty much the same as the habitat that they come from, right? And so in South America. And so you have several constrictors, anacondas, and pythons all out in the wild, but they have no predator, and that's the big thing. It's really easy to become invasive if you don't have something to keep you in check, right? No predators. And they compete with other large predators like alligators. So it's a kind of big deal. Ooh, and ground-dwelling birds, boy, they are all over that. Nutria. We've talked about the nutria before, and they're really cute right up until they open the mouths with their giant orange, crazy glow-in-the-dark teeth. They were brought for the fur trade, right? They're also South American in the 30s, and they were kept in little fur farms, but they escaped. They were let go. Oh, like the boa constrictors. Boa constrictors were escapees, or they were actually let go, like, be free, little snake. No, 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 right? That's a bad idea. Now, nutria also are generalists. They are great competitors. They are super destructive, much like feral hogs. They cause all kinds of damage. This used to be a nice little grassy area around the edge of a pond or stream here, and now you can see it is a sad, muddy, icky place. Zebra mussels. Zebra mussels are one of the poster organisms for invasive species. They actually will suffocate native mussels because they attach onto them. They attach onto everything. They were brought from Asia, Japan, right? They were brought in the ballasts of ships, and they have actually gotten into the Great Lakes that way. That's where they were brought in, but they've started traveling in rivers. And the thing about zebra mussels is they can actually live out of water for several days, which means if they're on your boat and you take your boat out of the infested place and then you drive it to some other non-infested place and you put that boat in the water, little zebra mussels drop off, and they are great reproducers. Okay, they do all kinds of things. I put this list in here for you so you can read all of that. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but they cause huge amounts of damage. Yeah, and they're dirty. Okay, so what are a common source of the introduction of non-native species? Ballast water, pet shops, poaching, all of the choices. Well, it turns out ballast water actually is a huge source. Now, pet shops, indirect, and we're going to talk about that in a second, but ballast water is the water that ships take in to balance their loads as they are traveling. They'll take it in at the dock where they are leaving, right, the port of exit, and then they will dump it in the port of entry. Well, any little organism that's actually in that ballast water is going to get dumped into the new place. A lot of times it doesn't survive, but like the zebra mussel, sometimes it does. Now, pet shops are not really a source of non-native species. It's pet owners that can be a source of non-native species, right? So pet shops just sell them. Pet owners let them go. Kudzu. If you've ever traveled anywhere in the South along the highways, you'll see this vine that encompasses everything, right? It just smothers everything. And that includes native vegetation. It's also inedible to most herbivores. So as this spreads and kills vegetation, it's not being kept in check by any sort of predator because no herbivores here eat it. This was a house, by the way. These were trees. Yeah. Oh, and you can't burn it. Right? You can set that whole field on fire, but as long as there's any root system at all whatsoever, it'll come back just like that. Okay, now, Africanized honeybee. This is something that's kind of a double whammy because not only is it invasive, but it's not actually natural. Someone bred Africanized honeybees because they wanted to make a bee that had increased honey production. And so they took these African bees and they bred them with these cute, docile European bees. And instead of getting this awesome honey producer, which African honeybees are, they got a hyper aggressive, like, killer bee that has actually been out competing normal European honeybees. Now, on the ecological side, that's not really that big a deal because they're still the pollinators. They actually fill the niche quite well, except they like to kill things. Yeah? And here, they don't like to. They just happen to be super aggressive. So when you walk by the hive, most bees are like, oh, go away, right? And they'll swarm at you, and you'll run a little bit, and then they'll quit. Africanized honeybees will continue swarming at you and stinging you. Okay, here's the difference. Honeybees will chase you for about 300 meters. Africanized honeybees will chase you for about 1,000 meters, and that's the difference. Okay, so you can see where they are, and they're spreading. This is only from 1990. They're all the way up in here now. So, all right, brown tree snake. This is not invasive to the United States. It is in Guam and is actually a huge threat to Hawaii. But this is an island problem. You cannot take ground predators to islands because when you do, you have a tendency to really disrupt that ecosystem by predating the ground-dwelling species. And on islands, you tend to have lots and lots of ground-dwelling birds, right? And so most of the species in Guam that have been threatened are birds or extinct, right? And the ones that are extinct were birds. And then one of them, though, is the Mariana's flying fox, which is not a bird, but it's something that's being threatened by the brown tree snake. And they fly in planes. They crawl up into the wheel well, and when the plane lands, they actually drop out on the runway. The runway's warm, so they heat up pretty quickly, and then they slither off into the forest. Mongoose. Mongoose is another island issue, right? In rats. Okay, rats are an issue as well. Rats are pretty much everywhere that ships go because rats get on the ship and then they get off the ship with the cargo and they go off and populate. Well, this happened in Jamaica, right? So the ships that were coming over to Jamaica for the sugar trade and all this good stuff brought over rats, right? So the great idea, and this is a case where we intentionally introduced a species to control another species that we had accidentally introduced. So this is just win-win all the way around. No, not really. Okay, so controlling the rats. So people release the mongoose, I guess, because the mongoose eats rats, right? Well, it turns out that rats are harder to catch than, say, I don't know, ground-dwelling birds. So the mongoose, instead of attacking rats, went for the easy prey and is now causing huge decline of bird populations in Jamaica. It's kind of the same idea as the brown tree snake, except this one was on purpose. The tree snake was an accident. All right, so which of the following is not a reason why invasive species are successful in an ecosystem? They have no natural predators, they have high biotic potentials, specialized niches, or an ability to live in a variety of habitats. Well, they have no natural predators typically. There's nothing to keep them in check. They have high biotic potential. They usually reproduce very rapidly. They're able to utilize resources very well. They have broad niches, right? They can live in lots of different habitats, which is what allows them to move to someplace slightly different, or even really different, as the case may be. They are almost never specialists because they would not be able to compete with specialists in the ecosystem if they were specialists in another ecosystem because they are specialists. But generalists, right, they do pretty well in lots of different places. So the answer to this is specialized niche. That is not something you will find in invasive species. Now, I've also put here some more links to the invasive species information, including the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that will tell you all of the invasive species in the United States. And then true or false, all non-native species are dangerous and should be eradicated. That's actually false, right? Only invasive species are going to be a problem. Things can be non-native and they can actually just kind of fit into the ecosystem and not really cause a whole lot of problems. It's the ones that disrupt ecosystems or have economic consequences, right? Or disease, right? Things like that, that we need to work on fixing. Yeah. Okay, so that's it. If you have any questions, thanks for listening, and I will see you next time.